Masechet Yoma, the 46. We are going to hopefully complete the fourth perek now, and we're starting with this statement. Amar Rabbi Elazar mishum bar kapara, Omer Hayyale Rabbi Meir. So this is bar kapara. He's a very early Amora, student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and he's going to tell us something in the name of Rabbi Meir. Now, who is Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah, this is just going back a couple of pages. He's the one that, remember when we said how many fires are there on top of the Mizbeach? He said the most. He said that there's 4 usually, and on Yom Kippur there's 5. The extra 4th one, he said, is because of the extra leftovers. If something was burnt on the Mizbeach and then it fell off and still not completely burned, so you put it on, right, the a 4th pyre to burn even more. That was Rabbi Meir's opinion in the Mishnah and in the Tosefta. So now Bar Kapara is giving us a interpretation, explanation. So he's telling us something about what Rabbi Meir said. He might have even met Rabbi Meir, could be. So anyway, Evrei Ola shenitotru oseh lahen maracha bifnei asma v'sodran v'afilu b'Shabbat. If you have limbs from a Qurban and Ola that are left over, that they weren't sufficiently burnt, so you don't put them back on the maracha gedola. You make a separate maracha and you arrange it on there. And you do that even on Shabbat. You might say on Shabbat, you're not allowed to burn things. So you might, maybe Shabbat, you would think that you don't, you can't burn it. You can't burn the leftovers, the extra. So that he says even on Shabbat. Okay, good. So that's Bar Kapara's tradition in the name of Rabbi Meir. But the Gemara is going to have trouble with this because we basically already know this from the Mishnah. So what is Bar Kapara coming to teach? My kamash malan tenena bechol yom hayu sham arba'a marachot. Right? It says every day there were 4. So every day means every day. First of all, including Shabbat, and so we know everything. Now, I mean, the truth is we could answer and say maybe Bar Kapara wasn't saying anything new. Maybe he was just teaching us the same thing that's in the Mishnah and in the Braita that we saw before. I don't know. Maybe he wants to clarify that it's even in Shabbat. But we're treating his statement as like just if you can't have redundancy in Pesukim. What are you adding? What are you saying? Anything different? So what's he adding here? Amar Rabbi Avin lo nisracha ela lifsulin. What he's adding is that this even applies to a korban that's pasul. A korban that's pasul that becomes tameh, or you had the wrong intention. So those things you're not supposed to burn, right? That's it. Once it's pasul, you can't burn it on the mizbeach. You have to take it outside and burn it outside. That's what you have to do lechatechila. However, b'di avad, if a kohen went and took a pasul korban and certain types of pisulim and put it on the mizbeach, then we leave it there, right? B'di avad, you leave it on there. So that's, everybody agrees to that. What Rabbi Meir is coming to add is that if that pasul korban that you put on the mizbeach, you weren't supposed to, but you did it, fine, leave it there. But then it falls off and wasn't sufficiently burned, that you go and you burn it again, right? You replace it on yet another ma'aracha. So even though it's pasul, that's the extra chidush. You even put it on another ma'aracha. Now, Rabbi Meir Bar Kapara doesn't say any words like that. It would have been nice if he said, afilu, right? This works even for psulim. He doesn't say anything like that. But anyway, so in order to account for the redundancy, so that's what Rabbi Avin says. Now, a little further clarification, the Gemara says that this statement of Rabbi Avin, "V'davka shemashla behen ha'ur, aval lo mashla behen ha'ur la." That statement that he says that you, for pisulin, you'd put it on another fire if it fell off. That's only if when you put it on the maracha gedola, the fire started consuming it. But if you put it on the wood, but on the side, and the fire still didn't yet start burning that piece of meat, then it does not apply. In other words, in that case, you'd put it further on the maracha gedola. So the extra maracha, the 4th one that Rabbi Meir teaches, that's only for something that was burnt somewhat and fell off, then you put on another one. But if not burnt at all, you put it back on the same one. So that's one version. of that clarification. A second version says that whether it's a regular kosher korban, or if it's pasul, the same law applies to both. And that if it was put on the maracha gedolah and the fire started consuming it, then and then it falls off, then indeed you put it on the extra ma'aracha, that's for extra burning. But if it did not yet, if you put it on the wood and the fire didn't yet consume it, then you just push it onto the fire and it doesn't go on the extra ma'aracha. So these are very similar. The only difference would be in a case where it was a kasher korban, and it was in fact on the fire. According to the first lashon, you just keep it on the maracha gedolah. According to the second lashon, you would put it on the extra maracha. Okay, good. So now we explained the statement of bar kapara. Even though it says basically the same thing as the Mishnah, we say it's coming to include something that's pasul, where you might have thought, since it's pasul, it wasn't supposed to be burnt anyway on the mizbeach. So should the leftovers be burnt? He says yes. You put the leftovers on that extra pyre. Now bar kapara. Furthermore, now the Rebbe Meir says vafilu b'Shabbat. Sorry, bar kapara here in the statement says vafilu b'Shabbat. So we ask again a similar question. Tenena v'hayom hamesh, in the Mishnah it says that. Why are you saying vafilu b'Shabbat? The Mishnah said that on normal days you have 4, and on Yom Kippur you have 5. Now Yom Kippur and Shabbat have the same law regarding burning, right? What can be burnt? If it can't be burnt on Kippur, it can't be burnt on Shabbat either. So our question is, why do you have to tell me that even on Shabbat we burn leftover korbanot, right? It says it explicitly in the Mishnah. You might have potentially given the same answer as we did before. It's talking about pisulin, but still the extra word that says to say afilu b'Shabbat, and we know all that. So Amar Rab Acha bar Yaakov isterich salka datechamina hanemile hechadechal Yom Kippurim liot achar Shabbat dechel b'Shabbat kedebin b'Yom Kippurim ava emsa Shabbat lo kamash malan. He says no, I needed bar kapara to tell me even on Shabbat. You know why? Because if I only had the Mishnah, I might have thought as follows: when you have Yom Kippur first, Yom Kippur after Shabbat, you have Shabbat and then Yom Kippur. And our calendar, that can never happen, right? We say Lo, Adu, Rosh, right? We make sure that Yom Kippur and Shabbat can never be back to back, because the rabbis didn't want to have 2 days in a row where you're not allowed to cook. It'd be very difficult, right? How are you going to prepare for the fast? How are you going to break the fast? Then have refrigerators. So that's our calendar, but it wasn't always like that. And at this time, it was possible to have Shabbat and then Yom Kippur. So I might have thought, when I have Shabbat first, so I had the Qurban Olah for Shabbat, right? The Qurban, the tamid in the morning, in the evening, and now they left those parts of the animal have to be burnt. Now Shabbat is even a holier Kedusha than Yom Kippur, right? Shabbat is even a worse, more harsher punishment for someone who violates Shabbat. So I would have thought, yeah, the Qurban tamid for Shabbat, I can take that Qurban tamid and burn it at night, meaning Erev Yom Kippur. I might have thought, yes, in that case. But if it was a regular Chol day and then Yom Kippur, then maybe not. Who's right? How can I take something that's from tamid shel Chol and then violate Yom Kippur by burning it on Kippur? So I might have thought that. And that's why Bar Kapara in his statement says, even on Shabbat, right? Even if it falls out in the middle of the week, yes, it still applies, and we burn the leftovers. Okay, so that's what it comes to teach. And here we have a pretty harsh criticism. Amarava man hay de la hayish lekimhe. So he's criticizing the Rav Acha. He says, who is it that doesn't care about his flour? In other words, what do you just teach things without analyzing what you're teaching, right? Like you're not careful to distinguish fine flour from coarse flour, barley from wheat, right? You have to make sure that everything you say is precisely correct. And what you said is not precisely correct. Bechol yom tenan kashya. The Mishnah says every day. So there's no way I would have even possibly thought that this applies only on Shabbat, when there's Shabbat and then Yom Kippur, and only then do I burn the leftovers on Yom Kippur, but not if it was during the week. It says Bechol Yom, so this happens every day, no matter what, no matter when Yom Kippur falls during the week. So there's no way I would have thought that to begin with. So that's a question, and we leave it as a question. All right. In any case, Upeliga de Rav Huna, both of the statements that we said before, Rava and Bar Kapara, they both agree that you do make a separate pyre even on Shabbat, right? Even on Yom Kippur, and that is going to be for anything left over, anything that wasn't fully burnt, that fell off the Mizbeach. We put it on this fourth fire on the Mizbeach. So far, everybody agrees to that. But the Gemara notes there's one person who doesn't agree. Ufliga de Rav Huna damar tchilato docha sofo eno doche. He says that the beginning of the Qurban tamid, meaning doing the shechita and sprinkling the blood, that overrides. Right now we're understanding it as override Shabbat. So, right, of course we do Qurban tamid on Shabbat. Everybody knows that. Sofo eno doche, but the end of the sacrificial service, meaning placing the limbs on the Mizbeach, does not override. Override what? He doesn't say. We're assuming now he means does not override Shabbat. So this is very interesting. This would mean that, let's say Friday's Qurban Tamid. You have the morning and the afternoon Qurban Tamid, and you do everything, you do the blood. What about the limbs? According to this, you have to put the limbs on the Mizbeach before sunset on Friday, because you can't violate Shabbat for Qurban Tamid. And then on Shabbat, you're going to do Qurban Tamid in the morning and the afternoon. That's fine. You'll do shechita and sprinkle the blood, but the parts of the animal leave till Saturday night, till Motzei Shabbat. Shabbat's over, right? So according to Rav Huna, you do not violate. So this is different from the opinions we saw before. The opinions we saw before said, yeah, you burn whatever you need to burn even on Shabbat, even Yom Kippur, even if it falls off, you put it back on. That's why we have the fire there, even on Shabbat. Okay, so this is Rav Huna's statement. However, Rav Huna's statement, we don't know precisely what context he said it in. So now we're going to go further into it. Gufa. Amar Rav Huna, tamid, techilato docha, sofo eno doche. That's all he said. And we're not sure exactly what he meant when he said it does override or doesn't override. Override what? Ma eno doche. And we have two interpretations. Rav Chisda Amar doche ta Shabbat, ve'no doche et hatum'ah. Ve'Rabba Amar doche et hatum'ah, ve'no doche et haShabbat. Here we have, it says in the old printed editions, it says Rava. Also, there's 9 manuscripts that say Rava here also. But it should be corrected to Rabba. And in fact, 3 manuscripts say Rabba. I know the majority say Rava, but among those 3 manuscripts is a Cairo Geniza fragment, which is always the best. And also it makes sense here because Rav Chisda is a 3rd generation Amora. So Rabba also makes sense, should be a 3rd generation Amora. We're going to see in a second that Abaye challenges it. He's the next generation. He's 4th generation. So it makes sense. The 4th generation would challenge a 3rd generation together with Rav Chisda. Anyway, so this should be Rabba. Okay, whoever it is, what do they say? So Rav Chisda is explaining Rav Huna. Rav Huna is from 2nd generation, right? So Rav Chisda is a student. He says that the Qurban Tamid does override Shabbat, but does override Shabbat. So he agrees, his interpretation of Rav Huna would agree with the other opinions above. What does he mean when he says it does not override? It doesn't override Tum'ah. If you have an animal that you designated as a Qurban Tamid and it became Tameh, he says, Eno dochet hatum'ah. So tamid, tchilato docha, what he means is that this animal that's tameh, you can do shechita on it anyway, because the beginning of the service and the blood service, yes, you do it anyway, even though it's tameh, it's okay. But the end of it, meaning the burning of the limbs, is not doche, it's tameh, and it's not absolutely necessary part of the service, right? The main part is the shechita and the sprinkling of the blood. Once you did that, the rest is tameh. Take it outside to burn. Don't put it on the mizbeach. So that's Rav Chisda's opinion. That it's all his restriction is talking about tum'ah, not talking about Shabbat. According to him, Shabbat you could do everything, the beginning and the end of the service. However, Rabba says no, the opposite. Dochet tum'ah. If it's tameh, it's okay. You burn it, you put the limbs on it, you do everything, even though it's tameh. But what does he mean? Eno doche tashabat. So this is what we were saying before, that according to Rabba's interpretation of Rav Huna, that Rav Huna would disagree with everyone else and say that on Shabbat you can only do the shechita and the sprinkling. You cannot burn the limbs on the mizbeach. Okay, now we're going to have a pretty serious challenge. Amar le Abaye le Rabba ledidach kashya u'Rav Chisda kashya. Abaye says, I don't understand where you're coming from. Not either interpretation. Ledidach kashya, according to you, that's the second one here. Ma'ishena tum'ah dichti b'mo'ado v'afilu b'tum'ah. Shabbat nameh b'mo'ado afilu b'shabbat. Says, what's your source? The source is regarding Qurban tamid, what we say every day in the Ketoret. So b'mo'ado means at its time. You have to bring Qurban tamid at the right time, meaning every day, in the morning and the afternoon. And that means no matter what, b'mo'ado. Nothing is allowed to stop you. So what did you use that for? To tell me that if it's tameh, you should sacrifice it anyway, right? That's your source. And therefore you think that you should do the whole thing, right? According to Lididach, according to you, what's the difference between tum'ah? How come you say tum'ah is okay? All right, that was Rav Chisda. So Shabbat also says b'mo'ado. So you should say even on Shabbat you should be allowed to do all of the service, beginning and the end. Well, Rav Chisda kashya, a question on Rav Chisda also. That's the first interpretation. Ma'ishena Shabbat ichti b'mo'ado v'afilu b'Shabbat. If you're going to say that the word ma'ado says, yes, you're allowed to do Qurban tamid, all the parts of it, even on Shabbat, because it's ma'ado, then use the same application and say, even if it's tameh. So, right, what's the logic to distinguish between tum'ah and Shabbat and say for one of them, you're allowed to burn the limbs, but for the other one, you're not allowed to burn the limbs. They're both being learned from the same pasuk. So that's a pretty serious challenge. And Rabbah answers, Amaleh, la ledidi kashya, v'la Rav Chisda kashya. Very nice of Rabbah. Not only does he answer the challenge to himself, he also answers the question to his colleague Rav Chisda. And even though he disagrees with him, but he defends both opinions. Ledidi la kashya. So for kitchilato, I say there's no problem because I hold of a principle that says the end is like the beginning. If you could do the end of it, then you could do the beginning of it. Tum'ah detchilato bar midcha tum'ahu sofo name dache. If you say regarding tum'ah that you're allowed to do the first half shechita and dam, then the end also burning the limbs you could do even though it's tameh. So you follow through, right? If this particular Qurban you're allowed to start it, then you're allowed to end it even though it's tameh. But Shabbat is different. Shabbat etchilato lav bar midcha Shabbat hu sofo nami la dache. Which Qurban tamid are you talking about? You're talking about the one from Friday morning and Friday afternoon. The Qurban tamid on Friday cannot doche Shabbat, right? That's not the right time. It has to be done on Friday. So therefore, you're allowed to begin it on Friday, but you can't end it because you're ending the Friday Qurban tamid on Friday night, which is Shabbat. So you didn't start something that can violate Shabbat. And so similarly, the Qurban tamid of Shabbat, that you're allowed to do on Shabbat, and you can start it. So that's fine. Of course, you can do the Qurban tamid of Shabbat in the morning and the afternoon. But in that case, you're not going to burn them anyway until Shabbat's over. So it's that case is not even relevant. So that's the difference, right? I hold of anything you can start on Shabbat. Yes, you can end on Shabbat, but you can't start a Friday Qurban tamid on Shabbat. That's why you can't finish it on Shabbat. So that's his explanation. Rav Chisda lakashya, I'll explain to you what Rav Chisda meant. So for kitchilato let le, he doesn't have this principle that if you can start it, you can finish it. Here's the difference, according to him. Shabbat tehutrahi betzibur, sofer namidache. Tumah dedechuyahi basibur, tchilato ikar kapara dache, sofo lav ikar kapara la dache. This is an important principle we've seen many times, the difference between hutra and dechuya. There's a lot of cases where you have two opposing principles, and sometimes you say, because of the opposing principles, one of them is totally permitted. You're allowed. This is like, if you have a traffic light and there's a red light, but there's a cop there, and the traffic cop says you can go. So he overrides the traffic light, right? And so it's totally allowed. You can't get in any trouble for going through that light because that's the law. The red light doesn't matter, only the cop. So that's called hutra. Dechuya is different. Dechuya is like you have an emergency, your wife is giving birth, so you're driving through red lights. So that's not technically allowed. It's just that dechuya, okay, the cops probably won't give you a ticket for doing that because you had an overriding reason, but you should still do it as little as possible. If you can, right? If you have a few more minutes, it's not such an emergency, then better to stop. So that's the difference between hutra and dechuya. And so he applies them differently regarding Shabbat and Tum'ah. Regarding Shabbat, he thinks hutrahi besibur. That even though Shabbat, you're not allowed to kill animals or anything like that, when it's talking about a Qurban Sibur, like the Qurban Tamid, then you're allowed to do it on Shabbat. Not only allowed, you have to do it. It's good, right? The Shabbat does not apply at all regarding Qurban Sibur. So since you're allowed to totally do it, that applies to the beginning and the end. So it's totally fine. You can burn the limbs on Shabbat. It doesn't matter. Any Qurban Sibur, it doesn't matter which one. However, Tum'ah is only dechuyahi basibur. When you have a Qurban, when you have a public sacrifice and it's tameh, we say, listen, the public sacrifice, okay, fine, we'll let you do it. But it's not totally allowed. We just what can we do? We have to make the best of a bad situation. So in that case, you can only do a minimal amount that's permitted. Since the beginning, the shechita and the animal and the blood is essential for kapara, so fine, do that. But kapara, burning the limbs is not absolutely necessary for atonement. So then that does not violate and you would not burn limbs that are tameh for a Qurban tamid, and so that explains the opinion of Rav Chisda. Okay, so that concludes that topic, and now we have the next and last topic of the chapter. Itmar, hamchabe esh machta umenora, Abaye amar chayav, Rava amar patur. This is very interesting. If you remember, we have a pasuk that says esh tamid tukal mizbeach lo tichbeh. There's a special prohibition not to extinguish the fire of the Mizbeach. You have to let it burn. You're not allowed to go up there with a fire extinguisher and extinguish. You can't even take one. You can't even, not even part of it. Okay, so that the law everybody agrees to. Here the question is, what if I take a shovel and I remove one of the coals, right? One of the burning embers. For what purpose? Esh machta means the one that the Kohen takes in a shovel for Yom Kippur that is going to bring to Kodesh Kodashim for the Ketoret. Or if I take an ember to light the menorah, all right? Remember we saw in the previous stuff that you have to get all of those fires from the Mizbeach. What if I take one of those? I say, I'm going to take this to light the menorah, and then I extinguish it, right? I don't know, for some reason, it's too hot. I have to go somewhere, I extinguish it. So Abaye says, Chayav, you extinguished something that's from the Mizbeach. You violated lo tichbeh. Rava amar patur, he says it's okay. Why? Let's see. So here's a distinction. If you extinguish the fire while this Kohen was on top of the Mizbeach, he's still up there, he takes a shovel, and then while he's up there, he extinguished. Everyone agrees that's prohibited. Chayav lo tichbeh. The question is, what if he went up, got something on the shovel, went down the ramp, and now while he's on the floor of the courtyard, he extinguishes it? That's the machloket. Abaye amar chayav. Esh mizbeachu. Chayav anyway, because you got it from the mizbeach. Even though you're not on the mizbeach anymore, it's still called esh hamizbeach, right? Tu kadbo lo tichbeh. It's still called that wherever you go. Rava amar patur kevan niteka. Rava says, no, once you remove it from the Mizbeach, it's no longer a fire of the Mizbeach, right? The Mizbeach has this fire up there. It's still burning fine. I'm not on the Mizbeach. I took something off and extinguished it. So that's totally fine. Okay, so that's the machlok between Abaye and Rava, and it really only applies to a case where you brought it down. But up on top, everyone would agree it's chayav. Now, Ela Hada Amar Rav Nachman Amar Abba Bar Avu. We have yet a third opinion though, and we have to. How does this fit in? Hamorid Gachelet Man Mizbeach V'Chiba Chayav. He says if I take an ember from on the mizbeach and bring it down to the courtyard and extinguish it, chayav. So Keman ke Abaye. Seems like he agrees with Abaye, because that's what Abaye said. If you bring it down and extinguish it, chayav. Does he only agree with Abaye and not with Rava? The answer is afilu tema ke Rava hatam la it netik lemisvata hacha it netika lemisvata. I can reconcile them, and I can say that there he did not take it for a mitzvah. So when Rav Nachman bar Abba says chayav, it means I took this ember for no reason. I didn't designate it for any reason yet. I took an ember. I'm going to use it for something. I didn't say what it is yet because I didn't designate it. So it's still considered a fire of the mizbeach. If I extinguish it, I'm chayav lo tichbeh. When Rava said patur, that's talking about a case where I was up there. I took an ember. I said this is going to be for the menorah, and then I went down to the courtyard. So now, if I extinguish it, I'm extinguishing a coal that's meant for the menorah. But since I already designated it for that, it's no longer considered a coal from the mizbeach. So the designation now removes it from being a mizbeach fire. Now it's a menorah fire, and then I'm patur from lo tichbeh. Okay, that's all one version of the machloket between Abaye and Rava, and we end with a second version. Ikad amre. Now, if you bring it down on the floor, everybody agrees patur. So this version, this ikad amre, is more lenient than the previous version. If you bring it down, no matter what, it's fine. The machloket is actually on top, and that's when you're on the mizbech, you take a coal with a shovel. Abaye amar chayav. That's where Abaye says yes, you are chayav esh mizbeachu because it's right. It's you're on top of the mizbeach, so of course you're chayav. Rava amar patur kivan nitika. Rava says patur because I put in a shovel, right? So now it's not on the pyre itself; it's now in a shovel. So it's not called esh mizbeach. Doesn't matter that I'm standing on the mizbeach. Doesn't matter where I'm standing. Because it's in a shovel, it's removed from the main fire. So patur. Okay, so now everybody's much more lenient here. Now again, we're going to quote this in the next, the third opinion. He said, if I take a coal and a shovel down on the floor, still I'm chayav. Keman. This can't be like anybody. So right, who was he possibly following? They both said if you take it down, patur. The answer is hatam la intik lemisvata. Hacha intik lemisvata. So it depends. If la intik lemisvata, if I didn't designate it, that's when Rav Nachman says chayav, because I just have a coal and still a coal of the mizbeach, no matter what, no matter where I take it. So then chayav. Whereas the machloket between Abaye and Rava here are talking about when I took it and I said this will be for the menorah, or this will be for the ketoret, for the kodesh kodashim. So once I designate it, then it already changes status. It's in that change of status, that's when I have a machloket. And Abaye says, well, if you're still up there, it's still going to be a problem. And Rava says, even if you're up there, you changed, you put in a coal, you separated it, and you redesignated it, then it's totally fine. So this is really fascinating discussion of fire because, on the one hand, fire is fire no matter where it is. But it's the purpose that you're using the fire does in fact change its designation and therefore changes the law. Adran alach taraf bekalpi baruch Adonai leolam amen ve'amen.